Hey, HawksZone Rundown fans. Bryce Coots here, and welcome to the absolute banger of an episode today. We're diving into the 2025 San Francisco 49ers with Jason Aponte, the voice of the 49ers from the Sprint Right Option podcast. He also works with SB Nation on covering the Niners. So the Niners are coming off a pretty rough season. They went 6-11 last year. We beat them in Candlestick, and that was Geno Smith's night-night gesture game when he ran in that scramble there at the end of the game to give us the win. They made some big moves this offseason, the Niners. They gave Brock Purdy that extension. Robert Saleh's come back. They got new faces on both sides of the ball, especially that defense has gotten much younger with what they did in the draft. So there's going to be a lot to unpack. As Seahawks fans, you know what? We always want to keep a close eye on our NFC rivals, especially for those heated clashes in 2025 at the beginning and end of this season. So Jason's going to be in here to break down the 49ers offseason, their playoff hopes, and what they're bringing to the table against our Hawks. So grab a seat and get ready for some spicy rivalry talk, and let's dive into this. Over next, Jason Aponte from the Sprint Right Option podcast. On next.
So y'all can sit here and ask me all the questions y'all want to.
Don't you ever talk about
Man, let's go. It's go time, baby.
I'm just about that action, boss.
You ready to go get it. You just like to do it.
That's what it is.
Defense trying to do that. Pass is caught back in. Can't chase it. What a catch! Jackson Smith and Jimbo. Are you kidding me? Baldwin. Oh my goodness, he caught it.
This is the HawksZone Rundown with your hosts, Ryan and Bryce.
All right, guys, I am lucky to be joined by Jason Aponte of Sprint Right Option podcast, covers the 49ers in depth. Jason, thank you so much for your time coming on here. How you been, man?
Good, man. It's just I got an email from the NFL today that said football is back, and it's just it just feels right again. Now my life has purpose. So I mean, thank you for the email. You know, I'm just really happy to just be talking about actual football and not hypothetical stuff.
Yeah, I know, man. I definitely agree with you on that one. Like, it's been a long off season. It's kind of, it's that period from like the end of the draft. Yeah, we get OTAs and mini camp and all that stuff. And it's like, okay, there's your like little like tasting of NFL's almost back. And then you're sitting there for like 6 weeks and you're like, what am I going to talk about? Like, what is going on? There's no news. This was a pretty quiet off season, honestly, in general. There wasn't a whole lot of drama, it seemed like, in a lot of ways. And then all of a sudden, training camp's here, and we're now in full tilt. And there was definitely some breaking news today. We just talked about a little bit off air there with Christian Wilkinson's release from the Raiders, which kind of shocked me. But that's going to be an interesting one with all the stuff that's going on contractually for him and what his grievance will be there.
Yeah, I mean, Pete Carroll, you wanted the Raiders job. Well, you're in it now, and this is going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because the funny part is that's the idea of guaranteed money, and being able to try to avoid that now. I wouldn't take that lying down either if I was Christian Wilkins.
Yeah, neither would I. And it's going to be, there's the last thing I just saw on it was basically that the reason they're voiding is they're saying his rehab, he didn't take it as seriously, I guess, as they deemed he should have. And it's like, you're not going to have a ground to like leg to stand on there. Like, as the Raiders, like, that's really what you're going to push to try and void his money. Like, that's going to be an interesting, but that's the Raiders. And you know what? They're kind of a cool story right now with Pete coming back and everything, but let's dive into the 49ers. And I know this is a Seahawk podcast, but I really want to get the perspective of our biggest division rival that we have, which are, you guys. So Jason, what was your overall thoughts of this offseason for the 49ers? There was quite a bit of change, and it seems like they're trying to keep that Super Bowl window pried open just a little bit longer. What was your overall thoughts?
You come off this horrific 6-11 season, and you wonder, where do you go from here? And it's a team that essentially caved on all of those contracts, paying Christian McCaffrey and Trent Williams and Brandon Ayuk to say, listen, let's get it done. And then you're off the heels of that devastating loss in the Super Bowl, and then it comes out that way. And you start to see the names trickle out that are not going to be back. Travis Ward leaves, Dre Greenlaw leaves, Talno Hufanga leaves. And I was at the Combine, and John Lynch is speaking, and he says, we have to get younger and cheaper. And that really, really, really pricked my ears up, because I said, well, there's going to be a lot of guys here that we thought were going to leave, but there's going to be more guys that are going to be gone, and they're really resetting this thing. It's a retool, reset, whatever it is that you want to call it. But that was really when it really dawned on me, like, the names on the jerseys are going to be very, very different, but they're not going to have this long time to get this thing right. Like, this is a very, very important season for Lynch and Shanahan, and they're basing a lot of their success on very new faces, i.e. rookies or people that they brought in. It's going to be very interesting to see how this season plays out. But the offseason went as a roller coaster. You see all the names leave. You say, well, can they even feel the team at this point? Then you start to see what they do in the draft, and you start to feel a little bit better. And I see the vision now. Now, does the vision include some stumbling? I don't know if that's true, but this is their plan that John Lynch said, and they completely outlined it. So we got to see what happens.
So one of the other big things that happened this offseason was the return of Robert Saleh to your guys' defense. What did you make of that storyline? Because personally, for me, I thought he might have got a head coaching job, an opportunity somewhere in this hiring cycle. But for him to go back to San Francisco, and then there are some stories that have come out as of late or, recently that, maybe him and Kyle Shanahan the first time didn't necessarily see eye to eye on some things. What's your take on Robert Saleh coming back?
The Robert Saleh thing is it's that tree, right? That Shanahan tree, and now it's branching out with Kubiak over there with you guys, and he was with the Saints, and obviously Mike McDaniel and all those guys, right? So there was an interesting podcast that came out. I believe I think it was the year before. The play callers podcast. I think Jordan Rodriguez, she did a great job with it. And there was a lot of talk about how competitive the both of those guys were. Like, they would go at it. And Kyle Shanahan is the type of guy that he wants you to push back, but he wants the answer. And Robert Saleh and him would go at it. I don't necessarily think that they weren't seeing eye to eye. I think it was just natural for Robert Saleh to finally get his job. And now he's back. But I think it's more about them swinging and missing on almost every single defensive coordinator the last 2 seasons and settling on guys that they basically were on their knees begging for Robert Saleh to come back. And Robert Saleh knew that he could dictate the terms, which were, I'm coming back. I'm picking my guys. I want you to stay away from the defense because I'm gonna draft all the guys. I'm gonna bring in all the guys that I want from the Jets that I've had. It's kind of like what he did when he moved over with the Jets. He took all those Niners players, and I'm bringing in a special teams coordinator, Brent Boyer, from the Jets as well too. So it's a little bit of twofold. Like, after the Super Bowl, Steve Wilkes gets fired, but they were so far in the the coaching cycle had already gone. There was nothing left, right? And we had heard the year before that they wanted Steve Spagnuolo, and the Chiefs said, no shot. They even asked Bill Belichick, Bill Belichick's not going to work under anybody. They wanted him as defensive coordinator. They end up with Steve Wilkes. 49ers come this close to winning a Super Bowl. Steve Wilkes goes. They go to Nick Sorensen, and they bring him in, Seahawks legend, by the way, too. And it doesn't work out. And now they got to a point where they basically were begging Robert Saleh. And they put their chips in the middle and all their eggs in one basket, which, by the way, I don't really know why eggs in one basket is such a bad thing. Like, how else will you carry eggs? Like, one at a time in different baskets? But they definitely, if they would have swung and missed on Robert Saleh, things would have got really, really dire. But they were prepared to offer him anything and let him do anything. It's his show right now.
So let's move over to the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, quarterback is kind of a thing. You guys gave Brock Purdy the big contract that everyone kind of, the $265 million extension, and you kind of moved on from some offensive weapons. Deebo Samuel's no longer there. They're working out George Kittle's new deal that he got. Christian McCaffrey's coming back off of the injury. First off, with the Brock Purdy contract, were you a fan of that deal, or do you think maybe the 49ers got pushed into a situation where they had to maybe overpay a little bit because of the fact that they didn't have another direct path to a quarterback if they were to move off from Purdy for whatever reason? What was your take on the contract?
I loved it. I think it's right in the sweet spot where it needs to be. When you see the names that are around it, Jared Goff, that feels right. Like, that felt right for me. And I do think that if Brock Purdy wanted to be a little bit more greedy, he could have been. He absolutely could have asked for more, but he didn't. And I do think he understands the importance of not breaking the bank to the point where the 49ers can't put surrounding pieces around him. And I think he understands that. I'm a big fan of the contract. I think, and obviously anytime you sign a deal, someone signs the next deal, it just pushes it further down. I think we're going to look at this deal in about 2-3 years if Brock Purdy continues to just be as efficient as he is, as probably one of the steals at the quarterback position, because the market's going to keep exploding. Everybody's going to keep getting their money. I think, you look at Josh Allen and what he got. I don't think Brock Purdy ever thought in his mind that that's exactly something that he could get. Maybe if he wanted to get greedy, he could say, well, look what I've done, and Dak Prescott hasn't done anything like this, and, I want something like that. But I think, Purdy understands his value. I think he understands he got exactly what he wanted, and it was a win-win for both. I loved the contract, and I think it's going to age beautifully.
So with that being said, the one thing with these big contracts when they're given out to a quarterback, sometimes it can limit what else you can do in other places. They've obviously extended George Kittle now. How do you view the rest of this salary cap with the Kittle contract, with Christian McCaffrey's contract still on the books, and now Brock Purdy's? Do you think this is why there was such a hyper focus on going defensive young in the draft because of how the cap situation is going to go going forward?
Absolutely. I mean, right now, I believe they have the second most cap space that they intend to roll over, about $52 million. And the cap increases every single year, essentially, just because business is booming. So I think they do have a plan, but that was part of the reason that you had to see all these guys leave. Traveris Ward is a former All-Pro. You got to walk. Trey Greenlaw is a guy that they drafted and loved. You got to walk. Talanoa Hufanga wants to get paid. Got to walk. That's just kind of how it works. So I do think they have a plan for that as well, too. And I think, the way that these contracts are structured, the people that really understand salary cap, I'm not one of them. I'll definitely tell you that. But I do understand that the way that they structure them, you can put in these void years. You do the backlog of paying and everything as well too. The 49ers have one of the best cap guys in the league, and that haggling and that way that they kind of structure the contracts, ironically, is the reason that sometimes these deals get held up and the guys want to hold out because of those things. But I'm not really too worried about the salary cap as long as it keeps increasing and they're able to roll this money over, even puts them in a spot if they want to at the trade deadline to possibly take someone on, if they feel like they're a piece away from competing. I think they're going to be in a fine spot.
So the one question I've got to ask you about on the offensive side as well, outside of Brock Purdy and the contract stuff, is Christian McCaffrey's health. Last year had some issues. How has he looked so far in training camp? I know it just started, but through OTA's training camp, has he started to look like the CMC of 2 years ago? Or do you still think these injuries are, kind of lingering for him?
Yeah, the optimistic side of me wants to say that it'll bounce right back, but I think I won't really know until the pads go on, which is Sunday. Right now, like what we're watching right now is just, it's hard to gauge from like 7-second videos and things like that. And I think, if we're watching the coach's film, you could see things way more, and way better. But I think he looks fine for a guy. It's strange to say, and I want to make sure I phrase it in a way that doesn't come off callous. It's almost kind of good that it was the knee that got hurt and not one of the Achilles, right? Because I feel like that is a easier thing to bounce back from. But from all accounts, he seems fine, and he seems to be his normal self. And, the little clips that I've seen, he looks explosive. But we're not going to know until the pads pop. And honestly, we're not going to really know until week one because, put him in bubble wrap and get him ready for week one. I don't think we really need to see much from him in the preseason at all.
So then the last group I want to ask you about is this receiver room. Obviously, Debo's gone. Brandon Ayuk's coming back. Ricky Pearsall's, injured as well. Juwan Jennings is having contractual issues going on. How does this receiver room shape up, do you think, come week one when you guys walk into Lumen Field to play us? Is, Pearsall and Ayuk going to be healthy enough potentially to be involved? How do they handle life without Debo? Debo did some very special things in that offense. And then at the same time, I think Jennings has some legs to stand on when it comes to a contract because he does a lot of the dirty work. Like, I love watching Juwan Jennings play. Like, even though he's on the Niners, he seems to be the type of receiver that would also fit in Seattle with his mindset. How do you see this receiver room, dealing with the injuries as well as some of those contract issues that are going on?
I think ideally week one would be Pearsall and Jennings starting. I don't think you can count on Brandon Ayuk. I would say the 4 or 5 week period, like around there, I would probably say like week 5, week 6 is probably the earliest. And that might even be, a stretch. You have to think about when the injury happened, how bad he tore up his knee. John Lynch said that, he's doing well, but there's no clear timetable. So, and Juwan Jennings is absolutely smart to ask for the money that he is right now. Like he understands coming off a season where he almost had 1,000 yards and the shape of this room right now. I think it's a masterful job by him and his agent. And he's been at camp both days. He's practiced. He hasn't. There's no hold in situation like with Brandon Ayuk. So I think before the pads go on, we're gonna see two things, which is Sunday. You'll hear about a Juwan Jennings, extension, restructure, whatever it is. I think they'll just guarantee the money that they were going to use as extended marks and qualifiers for him. And, maybe give him a little extra money. And, and Pearsall is probably going to be activated right before there. Now, the problem is this. The need for Ricky Pearsall to be good. Like, Ricky Pearsall needs to be good. Juwan Jennings is essentially found money for the 49ers. 7th-round pick, he basically redshirted his first year. Now look, like this is a great story and everything as well. Ricky Pearsall has to be good. He's a first-round pick. Like he has to be good. Like he can't just be out there running routes. Like he has to be good. You think about this, they were already bracing for the potential of losing Debo or Ayuk. That offseason got very contentious with Brandon Ayuk. The Debo thing it's a good and bad thing because I love watching Debo Samuel play. I think Debo Samuel has done things in a 49ers uniform that I think only 2 other receivers I've ever seen do in a season. It's like Jerry Rice and Terrell Owens. In 2021, he was the heartbeat of this team. He carried them and willed them all the way to the NFC Championship. But I do think it's a good thing because Kyle Shanahan did seem hyper-focused at times of feeding him, right? And now if he can get into this idea of spreading the ball around. Maybe you want to throw the ball to George Kittle a little bit more, right? And I think the way that you offset that loss with Deebo Samuel is you use Christian McCaffrey in some of those ways that you use Deebo Samuel. He can play a little bit more of that wide back role and, maybe split him out wide. And that also maximizes his efficiency and saves his body, and you have Isaac Guerrero who can do those similar things. So the 49ers are set up in ways that if the wide receiver room isn't up to snuff, I think you'll be fine with George Kittle, Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Christian McCaffrey as long as they're healthy and, Brock Purdy distributing them the ball. But I'm not going to sit here and act like Deebo Samuel leaving is something that's like, oh, who cares? I fully expect him to have a very big year in Washington.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you think of this Kyle Shanahan offense and you think of receivers, Deebo's really been the big name for a long time in that group. You guys really haven't had I want to say, I don't want to even give it disservice, but like just you haven't had standout guys. You haven't had like what we've had in Seattle with a DK and a Tyler where you're looking at them and saying, hey, like these guys are top, 20 NFL receivers. You guys have had Deebo who's been that effective, but then everyone else has kind of just done their role like a Juwan Jennings type. So my question, that I'm going to ask is on top of this, given kind of where some of the national media has gone with it in some respects, do you think the Brandon Ayuk contract that he signed last year is going to come back and bite the 49ers? Do you think he'll live up to what they kind of got forced into paying him last year?
I have to say I was right with Brandon Ayuk because you're looking at that range of like Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle, right? Like that kind of feels right, like where he should go. And as far as money, and when you look at their numbers, why wouldn't he ask for that, right? The problem is this. The injury on the back of the offseason makes this year the most critical, right? Because there was interest in the offseason, especially at the Combine, about people asking about Brandon Ayuk. And the 49ers had a decision to make. Do we sit here and wait for Brandon Ayuk to hopefully regain his form? Because I do think he's a phenomenal route runner. He is an X who can get himself open. I think, you look at the year that he had prior, 75 catches, 1,300-something yards. That's insanely efficient, right? But the problem is you take the risk of waiting for him to come back, and if he doesn't, then you can't move him because nobody's going to take that risk because of the knee. But if he does come back, then you still have to pay him. It's really, this is the turning point right now for it. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, and when you tear your ACL, MCL, and meniscus, that really, really is tough to come back from. But they're at the crossroads right here with this one. It's going to be, they're going to figure out whether this deal is going to be regret or they did the right thing, depending on how he comes back. And unfortunately, the injury is really the deciding factor at this point.
So we talked to it a little bit earlier, was Robert Saleh coming back and at the very beginning of the show. And now I've got questions for you on the defensive line and pass rush. It's an entirely new unit outside basically of Nick Bosa being there. And even in the linebacker core, Fred Warner is really the mainstay in that group. Both are aging players. They're still really good players and top players at their positions, but they're not getting any younger. And so when you saw where they went in the draft, what did you think of, obviously Michael Williams being drafted, Bryce Huff coming in, Nick Bosa being there? Like, what did you make of this revamped Niners? We'll just go D-line to start with in pass rush.
Yeah, it's the run defense because it was so porous last season. I mean, it was like 29th, and they just, if you can't stop the run, you can't rush the passer. And you have all these injuries piling up and everything as well too. But it had to be addressing the run. That's why you draft the Michael Williams and you hear John Lynch say we need someone who could set the edge, and that's something that the 49ers with the wide 9 defense, they constantly were getting beat to the edge, and they were just getting their, for lack of a better term, they're getting their asses kicked. But then you get the big boys, CJ West and Alfred Collins. Now the problem is I see the vision, I get what you're doing. but you're banking on a lot of rookies right now. You really are banking on a lot of rookies who are going to have to play a lot, right? So essentially, the holdovers from the defensive line, Nick Bosa, really good start. There you go. Yetur Gross-Matos, Kevin Gibbons, Evan Anderson, not household names, Sammy Okonkwo. Like, these are guys that are holdovers, but when we were looking at who left, you look at Javon Hargrave, they cut Malik Collins, and you're starting all over basically. So I think the first thing is stopping the run. And if you stop the run, then you can start to get into the the NASCAR package, which is what Saleh calls the pass rushes. So what do you do? Does Yetur Gross-Matos, because of his flexibility, play inside outside? Bryce Huff comes in on third down to rush the passer, but it all starts with the run defense. If you can't stop the run and get into those third down, obvious passing situations, then it's gonna be for nothing. So it's got to start with the run defense, and I think that's what Robert Saleh's number 1, 2, 3 priority was, because he understands that if you get into those 3rd and 6 and 37, now you have Bryce Huff, who was in a fit with Vic Fangio in Philadelphia, is coming back with Saleh. You get him, Mykel Williams, Yetur Gross-Matos, and Bosa, as your primary pass rushers. It's going to be a hell of a time trying to block those 4 guys because of the flexibility and how well those guys can work. But it has to start with the run defense.
Yeah, I know that was one thing I was going to say. With your guys' run defense last year, it was the one thing in our game at Levi Stadium there that Ken Walker was able to actually get going. And, obviously Geno won the game scrambling for a touchdown, which isn't something that we know Geno Smith to have in his repertoire, as long scrambles like that. But
he did this right.
Yeah, exactly, where he said it's time to go to sleep. It's going to be really interesting to see, because obviously Nick Bosa is such a impactful player. And I think for Seahawks fans, the one thing we're hoping for is that Abe Lucas and Charles Croft both stay healthy this year, because when Abe Lucas is around, like he was in that game, he does have an ability to handle Bosa to an extent or limit his impact. Now, I'm going to go to the secondary here. Again, like you said, Travarius Ward, Hufanga's gone. You guys bring in Jason Pinnock. You bring in Trey Brown. You draft Renardo Green. How do these guys fit into this scheme? And, from our experience, Trey Brown, really good corner, very handsy corner due to his size. And sometimes he takes unnecessary penalties. How do you think that's going to go over in San Francisco? And where do you think he fits into this group as well?
Yeah, I think right now with the safety position, it's a little weird. They drafted Jair Brown a few years back. He had a great season in the year that they went for the Super Bowl. He replaced Hufanga when he tore his ACL, and then last year had a down year. Malik Mustafa last year, absolute baller, but ACL injury, right? Coming back from that. So Jason Pinnock has been running with the ones. Richie Grant's got a little bit of burn today, if I'm not mistaken. But Jair Brown's got a really good chance to be, the starting safety again. Now the question becomes, if Pinnock plays well, who's going to see the bench? Is it going to be Pinnock, who they really think highly of, and I think Robert Saleh hand selected him, or do you stick with the guy that you took your, with the first pick in the draft, at the third pick, because they a third round pick, because they sent all those picks for Christian McCaffrey and Trey Lance, so they were picking so late. The cornerback situation is settled pretty much with Diamador Lenore and Renardo Green. I think they're fine with that. I think Kyle Shanahan kind of alluded to, yes, Diamador Lenore is very good in the slot, but we'd like to keep him outside because it's hard for him to do both. But I do think Trey Brown is going to get a shot to try to win this nickel corner spot. The 49ers have a bunch of nickels, right? The problem is that if Diamador Lenore or Renardo Green goes down, it's the outside corners, right? And that's where, you'd have to flip Trey Brown outside. And that's what happened today, actually. So Diamador Lenore came off the field. Trey Brown went outside. Upton Stout went into the slot, who the 49ers kind of likened to K'Wan Williams. Robert Saleh definitely has a type. This is what he was going for. He's trying to remake this defense as it was in 2019 when he was there. But, the secondary right now, they have a lot of nickels. The safety position's a little bit in flux. You're just waiting to hear what happens with Malik Mustafa. But the cornerback depth outside of the 2 starters, that's where it gets a little scary, and I think that's where the 49ers' depth will be tested. They're good 1-2, but after that, it's going to get a little weird if any of them have to miss any time.
So looking to this coaching and front office and the decisions that were made, Kyle Shanahan's leadership is one thing I wanted to kind of touch on, because it kind of came into question last year with the 6-11 team, and, he faced a lot of criticism. Do you still think Kyle Shanahan is the right coach to lead the 49ers back to a Super Bowl? And how long do you think he has to turn that around? And then after that, we'll get on to John Lynch and the roster construction and so on. But let's start with Kyle Shanahan. Is his job still as safe as it was, say, 2 seasons ago, coming off of that Super Bowl, or 3 seasons ago, I should say, or is time starting to catch up and people are starting to get impatient with Kyle?
I think he's good, but I do think this is probably the most important season for Lynch and Shanahan, because this season is going to determine the outlook of the team moving forward and this next chapter of their time. When you think about how Shanahan and Lynch took this team over and what shape they were in 2017, and 2 years they're in the Super Bowl, right? And every year they're in the NFC Championship game essentially, and I think everyone kind of chalks up what happened last year to all the injuries and everything, and guys were tired, and it was a really rough offseason. But if the 49ers don't come out of the gates and show that they're going to be this team that's getting themselves right back in the same position that they were in, the noise gets louder. I think two things are very true. I think his job is very safe. I think Jed York really likes him. I think Jed York understands the job that he took over. I think Jed York has learned his lesson about not messing around with coaches, right? But I do think it gets a little bit louder if this season starts to show cracks in their plan for the future, because this is the turning point of the next phase, the next few chapters of their time.
Yeah, that was the one thing I kind of wanted to know is, how does Jed York feel about, Kyle Shanahan? And I agree. I still think Kyle Shanahan's one of the best offensive minds in the NFL, hands down. I think honestly getting Robert Saleh back will actually help Kyle be a better coach, because now Robert's had that opportunity to go and be a head coach and see how that life really does work. And it'll be interesting. But yeah, I agree. I think you're right in the sense that this reset, I guess, or retool you guys are going through, because I wouldn't call it a rebuild, is kind of the same thing Pete and John Schneider did up here, and numerous times they had quick success. They were constantly in the playoffs, but throughout that, you start moving off aging players like the LOB. It's how do you rebound? How do you get back to the playoffs? How do you be viable as a contender? So yeah, I think you're right. It'll be very interesting to see, how that goes. But to move on to John Lynch, he was aggressive this offseason with some of the free agents and the draft picks. What's one under the radar move you can think of that will have a bigger impact that people aren't talking about this year or yet?
I think it's defensively, and I think it's the Nick Martin linebacker move. D Winters has been there, but Nick Martin, again, Robert Saleh had a lot to do with this draft. This draft is all, has his fingerprints all over it. But when we were talking about the run defense, right, and the wide nine, everything is about, you got to have the big boys up front to hold the blocks, right, and be able to stop the run. And that's why the 49ers generally target those linebackers that are faster, smaller, because they can get into those cracks and they can play a little bit faster and get in there and stop the run, right? Nick Martin is somebody that I think that while D. Winters is there, they're telling you what they believe about D. Winters by going with Nick Martin. And again, they're saying that he's like Dre Greenlaw and K'Wan Williams and Upton Stout. It's like all these guys that they've been bringing in have been reflections of former players for Saleh and the 49ers. They obviously have a type. So I think it's the Nick Martin one. We're going to have to figure out whether he's going to win the job, but D. Winters has started off very well. But, in this league, you're not going to be in base very much, right? Like, it's just, you're not going to have three linebackers on the field. We're a 4-3 team, but you're not going to be able to do that based on the way that people are, spreading the football around and they're throwing it on first down. You're not going to be in that a lot. But it's going to be interesting. I think that's one of the most interesting training camp battles, is what's going to happen with that position right next to Fred Warner.
So there was some talk that the 49ers, through national media and rumors and all that, they might make another splashy acquisition before the season starts. Is there any position or any names you're hearing that they may target to kind of help in one of these areas we've talked about, maybe the cornerback room? Anything in particular you think they could add before the season?
I was thinking about Julian Blackmon, and then he ends up signing with the Saints after, Honey Badger retires. Maybe somebody like Justin Simmons, who's still out there. I'm thinking more about the wide receiver room at this point, just based on, I think if they get a clear outline about Brandon Ayuk, then a name like Keenan Allen has to be in your mind. A name like Amari Cooper, possibly a Tyler Boyd, somebody like that who can play in the slot. But I think it would probably be wide receiver. I think right now the 49ers are very intent on rolling over all the cap space that they have. At times I kind of get on them because they live in this perfect world scenario, and it's very rarely a perfect world for the 49ers. There's always something going on. But I think if they're going to address anything, if you're a little nervous about the safety position, I know you drafted Marcus Siegel, somebody like Justin Simmons, or, if you're really worried about that wide receiver room, somebody like Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, like one of those guys that are just, these guys are sitting around. They just don't want to go to training camp more than anything. They're just waiting to see how other things are going to shake out, and they're going to pick their spot, and they're going to show up like whenever they want. They just don't want to go through training camp, and I don't blame them. It's really hot outside.
It's really funny you say that, living in that perfect world, because that's how, for me, looking at that situation to what you're talking about reminds me very much of what Pete and John were like together in Seattle in a lot of aspects. It was like, okay, we need to get something, like go spend some money, and they always kind of did this bargain shopping, and we lived in the world, especially the offensive line, of the Jamarcus Webbs and Luke Jokels and all these kind of things. It was like, go spend some legitimate money on some help. And it's funny now because with Mike McDonald here and John Schneider, it's almost John now that he's in full control. There's a little bit more, hey, we're going to go address a need. We're going to go do it. So let's talk about this rivalry, man. Like, this is one of the better rivalries, in my opinion, in the NFL. I look at the 49ers in some respects as more of a rival than I do the LA Rams. And a lot of fans have kind of said, oh, because LA's finished with it. I always look at the 49ers. I go back to even games when Jeff Garcia was quarterback and Tim Rattay. Like, they were always still close games, even in those bad years for the 49ers. So obviously last year, Seahawks, we finally got a win back over you guys in, Santa Clara there, which our fans loved. And it was, obviously Geno Smith, as you alluded to earlier, the night hand gesture was made. From your perspective, what will be one of the biggest challenges facing this iteration of the Seahawks in 2025 now that it's Mike McDonald's second year? A lot of the Pete Carroll stuff is now kind of gone. It's really, truly his vision going forward. What do you think some of the biggest challenges the Hawks present for your Niners?
Well, it's funny. I'm from New Jersey, right? So I'm not a Bay Area person, right? And if you ask a 49er fan, they probably would say, we have this long-standing rivalry with the Rams and the Raiders. I don't feel any of that. Right? Because of like that area. I don't get into that. Now, the Seahawks, I can remember clear as day, Terrell Owens on Monday Night Football catching a touchdown, pulling the sock out, pulling the Sharpie. Yeah, and I remember being tortured, during the Harbaugh years. And it was, those games were just knockdown dragouts. And it's just so funny how, the NFL has like this poetic justice about it, right? Pete Carroll and Jim Harbaugh, rivals in college. Well, you know what? Let's bring them to the NFL. Now you're rivals, with these two teams going back and forth. It's beautiful, right? And, those games, with, obviously, the Kaepernick interception. And that's still one of the best games I've ever watched in my life, despite the result. I can see clear as day, Cap, that jump pass that he threw straight to Anquan Ball, it was an absolute seed. Like, it's just like there's no way that, and Earl Thomas is right there and it goes over his hand. As far as the new rivalry and everything as well too, this thing really flipped when in 2019, and I think that's when I kind of like knew, okay, the 49ers are legit. So the 49ers start the 2019 season. Garoppolo's the quarterback. We got our Disney Prince as a quarterback. We got a franchise guy finally, but then we have to go to Seattle to either get the number 1 seed in the bye or go on the road the next week, and we hadn't won there and no matter how many games they won, they went into New Orleans that year. They had the shootout in the Dome, and I couldn't believe that we beat a Drew Brees led offense and Jimmy Garoppolo stood toe to toe with him. But I still felt like, if they don't win this one here in Seattle, I can't say that this team is going to be legit. Like, this is the last thing you have to do. Then obviously the Drake Greenlaw thing happens, and I'm just like, all right, that's it. And I knew what was going to happen next. Minnesota was going to come in, blew their doors off. I knew Green Bay was coming, knew we were going to knock them off, and then obviously they lose in the Super Bowl. But as of right now, with everything, I think it's the young defense you have. And what scares me a little bit is this, 49er fans were, oh, Mike McDonald's bringing over the Ravens defense. Yeah, he's bringing over the Ravens defensive scheme. He's not bringing over Kyle Hamilton and, and all these guys at Roquan Smith and, not knocking you guys. I'm just saying, like, scheme matters, but players matter, way more, but it's now starting to round into shape, right? And I think Mike McDonald is a good coach. And now what scares me a little bit is this Kubiak thing is there now, and if he unlocks, a little bit of Sam Darnold, it's going to be a little bit back and forth. The NFC West is like a man, crabs in a barrel kind of type thing. Like they like I think this is like there's I don't really see like the 49ers like dominating any of these teams or anything like that. I think all of those games will be closely contested, but if I had to be scared of anything, I think it's that the Seahawks defense has a chance to take a really big leap, and that's not good for anybody.
Yeah, when you talk about that Seahawks defense and its youngness, and like I agree with you. When Mike McDonald got hired, I went, awesome, we're getting this scheme. But how many guys is he bringing? He's not bringing Roquan Smith. He's not bringing Kyle Hamilton. He's not bringing, the Jadeveon Clowney and, Kyle Van Noy pass rush he was getting and, all the other thing and Metabuikwe and all these guys. They're not all coming with him to, Seattle. And it was really interesting because he didn't bring a lot of the coaches either that ran the scheme. A lot of them got hired out. So really Mike built a coaching staff on defense, especially, Durde and a bunch of these guys. He really handpicked his defensive staff, and the offensive staff last year, I think, got kind of missed in that. We ended up with Ryan Grubb, and it was a failed experiment. I was happy they tried something new, but to get Clint Kubiak in with John Benton, with Rick Dennison, and really have an identity when it comes to offense is what I'm excited about, because I don't think Clint Kubiak's necessarily a head coaching candidate anytime in the next 3 years. I think he's going to be an OC, and I think that's kind of where he's at. But the thing for me was when John picked the linebackers, because John really did pick our linebackers to start last year in Jerome Baker and Dodson, you could see it wasn't working. And this is where I was talking about how Seattle has changed a little bit in their mindset, and they now go and get people. Getting Ernest Jones and playing Tyrese Knight, the rookie, all of a sudden our defense was changing before everyone's eyes. And now you add, arguably, which I can't believe a lot of teams let us get, and Mike McDonald get Nick Emenwari in the draft. Now he's kind of got his Kyle Hamilton that might even be a better athlete than the Kyle Hamilton, when he had Kyle in Baltimore. And you're starting to see, Byron Murphy is in year 2 now, who I still think is a really good player, just misused last year due to the lack on the D-line. So it'll be really interesting to see how the Seahawks, but I agree. I think the Seahawks defense is going to be their leading force again, which will be great if we get those classic 49er Seahawk games that are those 20-17, whoever can get to 20 and hold off in the last 5 minutes, that's going to win you that game. And I think for us, you talk about that 2019 game. I think for us winning last year for Mike McDonald in Santa Clara, because when you guys came up here, you beat the brakes off us. We looked horrible in that game. And I went, okay, nothing's changed. We're still basically the 49ers whipping boys. And then when we went in there and we were able to, at least go toe-to-toe and beat you guys there, I think it kind of changed that mindset a little bit that like, hey, we can start to play with these guys again. So it'll be interesting. The one thing I got to ask you about in this, intense battle that we got going on is, what do you think in game 1? Obviously, there's going to be a lot of things that can transpire between now and then, but we play each other week 1 and then we play each other at the end of the year. So we get a long time between seeing each other. In game 1, what are you expecting to see in that game? Do you think it's going to be a defensive kind of knock each other around, or do you think one team kind of has the edge going into that week 1 game?
I think week 1 is always so hard to predict, and everybody is kind of funky playing football, that week. I think that's why you see like so many strange outcomes, right? Like teams that you normally wouldn't struggle with other teams, right? Because you have all those guys that are not playing in the preseason at all, right? And they're really knocking the rust off. I think the most interesting aspect of this is going to be the chess match between Kubiak and Saleh, who know each other very well. But what I was looking at, and this is before Derek Carr got injured. Last year, when Kubiak was the offensive coordinator for the Saints, it was motion, and he was, and that's what he's gonna bring to you guys is a lot of pre-snap motion, which helps dictate man, zone, things like that. You're also gonna get guys in position. That's why they were able to dial up so many downfield plays for Derek Carr, who never wants to throw the ball downfield. Funny enough, right? To Rashid Shaheed, and you saw it happen. And early on in the season, he was cooking. Now when Olave goes down and Carr goes down and they're out of quarterbacks, obviously you can't keep doing that. But it's gonna be interesting to see that with the combination of your players, right? Like Darnold already knows him because of the time with with the Niners, and then JSN is there, and how do you guys incorporate all that motion and who's gonna be able to get the advantage? So I'm very interested in the chess match of that, because I know what Kubiak is going to try to bring, and I can already tell right off the bat how this offense is going to be far harder to deal with. Now the real question just comes down to is Darnold going to hit those throws, and you've got to keep him clean. I think obviously last year, renaissance year for him, clearly. But you saw when the pressure's on him and he started to see the ghosts again. Like, I hate just bringing that back up, but and essentially that cost him a lot of money. It really did, because people were just like, aha, there it is. If he would have had a little bit better, like, that last game against the Lions, if he would have looked better in that game, or if he would have looked good in that Rams game, that they lost in the playoffs, he would have asked for a little bit more money. But I think it all just boils down to that. But I understand what Kubiak's going to do. He's going to get him his layup throws, all of those things, and he's going to move people around the formation and wreak havoc. I'm just interested to see how Robert Saleh counteracts that, and what the 49ers secondary is going to be able to do with that.
So looking at this NFC West as a whole, obviously the Rams and Cardinals are two other teams in it. What did you take away from this offseason and where this division's at in an NFL landscape? For me, I think basically this is one of the top 3 divisions now in the NFL. I see all these teams potentially being over 500 at the end of the year, like the 4th place team probably being a 9-8, maybe even 10-7, depending on, wins outside of the division. What did you take away from this offseason, and what's your thoughts on the NFC West as a whole right now?
I'm just really sick of the Seahawks, the Rams, and the Cardinals drafting good players, right? Like, I just really dislike it. If they could stop doing that, that would be really good. And funny enough, the 49ers' whole plan is copying what the Rams did, 2 years ago, right? And they outline, this is what we're going to do, what the Bills and the Rams did to quickly reload and not miss a beat. The difference is Matthew Stafford and Josh Allen are the quarterbacks, right? Your quarterback's Brock Purdy, right? But, when you get Jared Verse and you get Braden Fisk and then, the Cardinals get Will Johnson and, Walter Nolan's injured. We're going to find out about him. I was pretty high on him. And then you guys, you get your safety from it's just everybody is catching up to everybody. And that's why it's called not for long. But the Rams are still, in my opinion, should probably be the betting favorite to win this division. As long as you have Matthew Stafford and you have Sean McVay, you have a chance. You give him Devontae Adams now, God help us all, like at this point, and they obviously they have Puka, but, landing Jared Verse, that edge rusher, right, like, in getting that premium edge rusher changes things so quickly, and that's why you see the 49ers trying to duplicate that, right? Like, we're going to go get Mykel Williams, and we need him to be good day one, like Jared Verse. I don't know if you could, like, someone asked a very good question about if you could take one player from any of the other 3 NFC West teams, just one player, who would it be? And you get the popular answers of Puka Nacua, somebody said Kenneth Walker, JSN, right? Like, mine is Jared Verse. Like, yeah. I would take Jared Verse and drop him right on the defensive line and feel great about it and run home. So it's interesting that the 49ers are trying to duplicate that. I still think the Rams should be favored. The 49ers, if all breaks right, which, when does it ever all break right, should be in that mix. But I think everybody is pretty close. And Arizona always has a way of, they beat us in Levi's as well, too. And they always give us fits because the 49ers have trouble with running quarterbacks, and Kyler Murray's always doing that to us. But, yeah, it's going to be very close. I think, all of those games are close. I despise division games because I know how close they're going to be, and, I know how annoying they are. And, and it's just something about, those NFC West games that feel magnified, because I do think that because of the NFC as a whole, I don't know if there's going to be more than one team in the NFC West that makes the playoffs. Like, it almost feels like you have to win this division if you want to get in, because Lions, Packers, Bears, Vikings, 3 of those 4 teams are going to make the playoffs, and then Washington, and then Philadelphia, it starts to get thin, so it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. But I wouldn't blame anybody if they said that they thought the Rams were going to, win the division. But it's going to be tight with everybody. And I think only one team is going to make it, honestly, when you start to count down the playoff spots.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting divisional shakeout. I don't think there's anybody that's going to be massively, get a 4-2 divisional record in this division that, there may be one team, and that's the team that wins it. I think everyone else is going to beat up on each other, kind of to what you were talking about there, Jason. Like, everyone keeps drafting good players. And again, even for me, if I could have one player from any team on the NFC West, I'm picking, Jared Verse right now as a young player. I think he's, going to be, because for me, I was torn. They, Byron Murphy or Jared Verse, right? And the fact that Byron Murphy was there, we needed a guy in the middle of our defense because we didn't have, all the pieces there. We got Leonard Williams, but kind of it's going to be interesting to see regardless how this division shapes up. But Jason, the last things, I kind of wanted to ask you here today on the show, what were your thoughts of the Seahawks offseason? And what did you think of this now going into year 2 from Mike McDonald? They had the draft. They made these big changes. They moved off of DK and Tyler Lockett and Geno Smith, and they bring in Sam Darnold and Cooper Kupp and, DeMarcus Lawrence and some of these other, older players. And then what they got in the draft, Gray Zabel, Nick Emenwari. One of my secret favorite picks is Jalen Milroe. If he pans out, I'm really hoping for that one. So from a 49ers perspective, do you think this, draft and offseason moves the Seahawks in a more upward trend, kind of getting back into being in that conversation, fighting for the division? Or do you kind of think it keeps them status quo? Or did they take a step back potentially to take like a 2-step forward kind of a thing?
It's interesting because, obviously quarterback's the most important position, right? And I feel like Darnold and Geno are, I don't want to say they're not mirror images, but they're in the same tier. They're in the same tier, right? So it's interesting to go from one to the other, right? And it's so funny too, right? Geno, Darnold, Baker, all guys who like reclamation projects, and they're playing their best football now, right? Like, and I think that's what's interesting. It all starts and ends there, right? And this is what's going to be interesting about this is the pivot to Darnold from Geno. It feels like the same tier, not the same guy, but this is going to be what determines how you guys move forward. Now, I do like the idea of pairing him with Kubiak, and I think that's very smart. I think you have to get him somebody that, he knows, and there's not going to be him learning another system or anything like that. Like, he can just get in there and step right in. The Cooper Kupp thing gives him an experienced route runner. Obviously, Jackson Smith and Jigba had a phenomenal season. Last year, I thought he was the best slot in the league last year, when he was pressed in there, but it's almost like the Seahawks and the 49ers in the same offseason kind of did the same thing. You see some of your stalwart players go off, you make a move from there, and now you're retooling. But I don't think that you guys are thinking that this is going to take, a few years. I think you guys are trying to bounce back like right away. And I think you realize that once Matthew Stafford goes away, whenever that is, that it's up for grabs, the NFC West, right? Like, and you don't want it to get too far away, right? So I think this is a vital year for you guys to figure out what the rest is going to look like, just like the 49ers, because you saw so many impact players go on both sides of the ball, and you do have this influx of talent, and now you have the new quarterback. The new quarterback thing is the only thing that's really different between the two franchises, but it's going to be really interesting to figure out how this, how are we going to look back at this Geno and Darnold move? Like, how is this going to be remembered? I could tell you in 1 week that I'd say that Geno's better than Darnold. I could tell you in another week that I think that Darnold's better than Geno, right? Like, it's just, they're in the same tier. I'm not trying to say, and I'm not saying anything bad either. I think the both of them, especially Geno Smith, is Geno Smith for sure is one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the NFL, right? Like, I do think that, and, that's why, Pete Carroll wanted to get him over there with Vegas, but it's going to be interesting. I think the quarterback is where it really starts and ends, but I think you guys and us, we're kind of mirrored each other in terms of, like, moving on from players that the names on the jerseys are very different now.
Yeah, and that was what I was going to, piggyback off of there is like you guys did it on the defensive side. We really did it on the offensive side. Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting to see how it all shapes up. And I agree with you. I look at Geno, Darnold kind of in that same tier. The thing that I like is you're getting a quarterback, and this is where, for me at least, looking at the direction the Seahawks are going, you're getting a quarterback that fits this scheme. He knows this scheme. He's not going to be learning it for the first time where Geno would be. But you're also getting a guy that's 10 years younger and a bit cheaper on the contract, right? That's where you're kind of playing with it. Now, the biggest thing for me with this quarterback room is the addition of Jalen Milroe to it. And the fact you were able to go get a guy that if he develops as a passer, and all signs through the first couple of days of camp is he's already started to make that progress, you could be looking at 2027 and Jalen Milroe is the starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. And that just poses a whole bunch of different problems to the NFL. We're looking at a guy that's built similar to what Cam was, but can move to an extent like Lamar. And if he can throw and be a competent passer, I'm not saying being, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow type passer, but just someone that can move the ball and be an effective quarterback throwing the ball, like that changes things in a whole different right for Seattle. And having a rookie quarterback on a rookie contract never hurts, as we all know that can be generally a very beneficial thing when you build the rest of your roster. But Jason, I really want to thank you for your time today. Like, man, it was great to have you on the show. definitely want to have you back on the future, but let my listeners know where they can find more of your stuff, your podcast, and all your content that you got going on.
Appreciate you, man. I love talking about other teams, man. Like I love the Niners, but I love talking about other teams. I just watch so much football that I really enjoy it. Thank you for having me. My YouTube channel, you can just look me up, Jason Aponte, but it's all 49ers centric. So if this is a Seahawks crowd, you're probably not gonna want to watch it. But and I write for NinersNation.com, which is an offshoot of SB Nation. And and on Twitter at Jason Aponte 2103. Generally on Twitter, I have a lot of fun and I like posting memes, but I throw some educational stuff up there as well too. So,
hey Jason, I will tell all my listeners to go and view your stuff because I always encourage my guys to go and figure out other teams, learn from other content creators about what's going on, rather than just our Seahawk perspective of the 49ers and the Rams and et cetera. But man, I really appreciate your time and. Hopefully the first game of the season's a good one, and we're not sitting there going, man, it's a 6-9 game just kicked with field goals all day. So,
please, I have a long history of not liking kickers. That's my personal hell right there. Is like just field goals. But yeah, we'll get you. We'll do a collab pod. The first week and everything before, like to break down the game and and talk about it. So yeah, we'll stay in touch, man. Thanks for having me.
Sounds good, Jason. Looking forward to it, man.
All right.
All right, guys, that was guest Jason Aponte from Sprint Right Option Podcast. We discussed the 49ers, which, as we all know here in Seattle and with the Seahawks, are definitely probably one of our biggest rivals outside of the Rams. We've definitely had a few good, matchups with them over the years. And we got our win last year, which was huge, getting that in Santa Clara. But, listening to Jason's perspective and, the one thing I appreciate about it is he's open, he's honest. He's not fanboying and, just saying how great the 49ers are. Like he admitted there's issues that they need to deal with. And especially when we got on the discussions, about, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch and the moves they've made and even to the secondary and saying like, really, they're struggling to find guys to be on the outside and what the receiving core looks like outside of, they need Ricky Pearsall to be a hit. And, Brandon Ayuk probably isn't back till maybe after week 5. Like, it's going to make that week 1 matchup with them very interesting. And I really thought it was interesting what he said there towards the end about how his big thing he's going to be looking forward in that game is how does Clint Kubiak's motion and things he does challenge Robert Saleh being back here in this division with all the young guys he's got on defense. We've added more veterans on offense, and we've kind of done similar things in a lot of ways in this offseason. So, it was a really fun show. I really enjoyed it. And I hope you guys do as well. We have one more of these in this series coming out, which will be on the Arizona Cardinals, and that'll come out in a few weeks here. But honestly, guys, I can't, think of someone better to have on. And we're definitely going to do, me and Jason will probably do a week 1 preview show in some aspect coming up here before we get ready for the 49ers and Seahawks at Lumen Field in week 1 of the season. But guys, before I get out of here, I just want to say, don't forget, join our YouTube membership program. That's how you're going to see this video before anyone else does. Same with our one that I did with Blaine over from Turf Times show and podcast with the Rams. That one came out before. Now we've got Jason's coming out, and it'll be coming out, soon here. And then we'll have the one with the Cardinals. But guys, make sure you become a member. That's how you're going to get those kind of opportunities. There's going to be other different content related things that are going to come out throughout the season that members will get only, and just normal viewers will not. It's just something that me and Ryan have discussed that we want to do. We want to give more to our members that have been with us for a while. So guys, it's like $2 to join the membership program. It's worth it. It gives discounts at the HawksZone Rundown store for our gear, and make sure you guys hop over there to HawksZoneRundown.com. Check out, we got golf shirts, t-shirts, hoodies, beanies, different hats. We'll have, a couple different stuff coming out for the 2025 season. A couple different logo designs and stuff. And we're also going to get you guys to vote on one of the logo designs and see which one you guys want to see on the next set of HawksZone Rundown gear. Make sure, though, guys, you go down. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Click the notification. That way you'll see this show. Share it with your friends. Share it with fellow Hawks fans and 12s. Help us get over 2,000 subscribers. We're close. We're at about 1940. Getting up there. We want to kind of get over that before the start of the regular season, get over that 2K mark. That'll be huge for the show. But also, guys, with that being said, check us out, field goals. We're on field goals as well now. Mookie Alexander, John Gilbert over there in that crew, they do phenomenal work. You can see our articles about the shows there. Links to the shows are there. So make sure you guys are always checking out fieldgoals.com. And as well, follow Jason over on Jason Aponte 2103 for Twitter. as well as the Sprint Right Option podcast down below, guys. Guys, I can't stress enough, one of the best things about all this content that's out there on NFL teams is to learn things about other teams in the division. Go over, check out Jason's stuff. It's great. It's going to be down in the links below, so make sure you guys check that out. But other than that, guys, this is a 49ers season preview with Jason Aponte, so make sure to check it out, guys, and go Hawks.